Hello everyone. We know that the Java is a very pure object-oriented language, and Java gives the JDBC, that is Java Database Connectivity, which accesses the database and requires the JDBC, which will provide the standard API, and that has used to access the databases through Java regardless of any database management system. Now we know that the components of JDBC has been done, and as all the directions with the interactions with the specific DBMS, those are accomplished by the DBMS specific driver. Now, the architecture of JDBC has four different components, and those components are application, driver manager, data source specific drivers, and corresponding data source. Now, an application establishes and terminates the connection with a data source. The main goal of driver manager is to load JDBC driver and pass the JDBC function calls from the application to the corresponding driver. The driver establishes a connection with the data source. The driver performs various basic functions like submitting requests and returning results. In addition, the driver translates data, error formats, and error codes from a form that is specific to data source into the JDBC standard. The data source processes commands from the driver and returns the results. Now, the JDBC drivers can be classified into different categories. A JDBC driver translates standard JDBC calls into a network or database protocol or into a database library API calls that facilitates communication with the database. This translation layer provides JDBC application with the database independence. If the backend database changes, only the JDBC driver need to be replaced with a few code modifications are required. So there are four distinct types of JDBC drivers. The first is a JDBC ODBC bridge. Then second is a Java to native API. Third type is Java to network protocol or all Java driver. And fourth is Java to database protocol. Let us discuss each type with its advantages, disadvantages, and the working of these all JDBC drivers. The first type 1 is JDBC ODBC bridge. The type 1 drivers acts as a bridge between JDBC and another database connectivity mechanism such as ODBC, that is other database connectivity. The JDBC ODBC bridge provides the JDBC access using the most standard ODBC drivers. This driver is included in the Java 2 SDK within the sun.jdbc.odbc package. In this driver, the Java statements are converted into a JDBC statements. The JDBC statements call the ODBC by using the JDBC ODBC bridge. And finally, the query is executed by the database. This driver has a serious limitation for many applications. At the right hand side, the figure shows with the local computer having the Java application, the application code is there, and type 1, that is JDBC ODBC bridge, is given here. And the ODBC driver is again the next part, where this ODBC driver is concerned with the DB, that is database vendor driver, and local DBMS. Now, the database server has different data which is stored in the proprietary vendor specific protocol, and network communication will be done. Now, this JDBC ODBC bridge will be connected with the ODBC, that is other database connectivity. So this is the first type. Now, what are the functions of this first type? That it translates query obtained by the JDBC into corresponding ODBC query, which is then handled by the ODBC driver. Now the Sun provides this JDBC ODBC bridge driver, that is sun.jdbc odbc.jdbc ODBC driver. This driver is native code and not a Java, and it is very close to source. Now the client to the JDBC driver, to the ODBC driver, to the database, we have to provide the connection. There is some overhead associated with this translation work to go from JDBC to ODBC. What are the advantages? Almost any database for which ODBC driver is installed can be accessed. So any database for which the ODBC driver is installed in your computer, that can be accessed by this JDBC ODBC bridge. What are the disadvantages? That the performance of these calls have to go through the JDBC and overheaded the bridge to the ODBC driver, then to the native database connectivity interface. So there will be some issues with the ODBC because the overhead bridge will not be worked. The ODBC driver needs to be installed on the client machine, and considering all the client side software needed, this might have not suitable for the applets, because the applets works on the server level software. The next type is a Java to native API. This type driver uses the Java native interface, that is JNI, to make calls to the local database library API, application programming interface. This driver converts the JDBC calls into the database specific calls for databases such as SQL, Oracle, etc. This driver communicates directly with the database server, and it requires some native code to connect to the database. Now, the type 2 drivers are usually faster than the type 1 drivers. Like type 1 drivers, type 2 drivers requires native database client libraries to be installed and configured on the client machine. At the right hand side, the figure shows with the local computers, and it will be get connected with the database server, where the Java application has an application code and type 2 as a DBMS driver, and this driver will be get connected with the database vendor driver that will be located on the local DBMS. So that is the client machine. So this type 2 is also important JDBC driver, where it shows the functions that this type of driver converts JDBC calls to the client API for that database. This type of driver actually converts the JDBC calls into the client API for the database. This is good function for the application developers. The client tends to the JDBC driver, then it tends to the vendor client database library, and then towards the database. What is the advantages of this Java native API, that is the type 2? It has a better performance than type 1, and since no JDBC to ODBC translation is needed. Now, the disadvantages are also there. The vendor client library needs to be installed on the client machine. and it cannot be used to internet due to the client side software is needed. So here we cannot use the internet due to the client side software will be get needed, and if that client side software will be required, then we are not doing the client library that which will be get installed in the client machine. So there is not all databases which will give the client side library. Some library is actually works with the native API, so that the Java actually not works with the client side library. The third type, is a Java to network protocol or all Java drivers. So this three type is a pure Java drivers that is use a proprietary network protocol to communicate with the JDBC middleware on the server. The middleware which will translate the network protocol to database specific function calls. Now this type 3 drivers are a mostly flexible JDBC solution because they do not require native database libraries on the client and can be connected to many different databases on the backend. So this type 3 drivers can be deployed over the internet without any client installation. See, in the figure it is shown as Java to JDBC sequence, JDBC statements, then SQL statements to database. So local computer machine, that is the client machine, is there where the Java application is loaded and application code which will connected with the type 3, that is Java to network protocol, and JDBC net pure Java is connected with the application code. Now this is a particularly breach with the middleware server where JDBC type 1, type 2 and type 4 drivers are installed, and that will be get connected with the database server where the network communication will be done and the proprietary vendor specific protocol will be get activated. So the JDBC statements which will be concerned with the SQL statements and the database. That is the working of type 3 Java to network protocol. What are the functions of this type 3 has a good functions which will follows a three-tier communication approach. So that will be in our previous slide. It is shown that there are three-tier communication approach. Now it can interface to multiple databases, not vendor specific. So it will connect with the multiple databases and interface will be having the good approach. The JDBC client driver written in Java and communicates with the middleware network and net server using a database independent protocol, and then this net server translates this request into database commands for that database. So the JDBC client driver which are written in the Java, this will communicate with the middleware net server which is using a database independent protocol, and that then this net server translate all the requests in the database commands for that database. So thus the client drivers to middleware communication is database independent, and the communication between client to JDBC driver to middleware net server to any database is shown with the type 3, that is Java to network protocol, all Java drivers. There are some advantages and disadvantages of type 3 also. Since these are the advantages, since the communication between the client and middleware server is database independent, there is no need for the vendor DB library on the client machine. So sometimes we require the database library which will be placed on the client machine, but it is not needed in this type 3. So also the client to middleware need to not to be changed for the new database, even though for the new databases we does not require the database library on the client machine. The middleware server which will be can be a full-fledged J2EE application server. It will provide typical middleware services like caching, that is connections, query results, and so on, load balancing, logging, and auditing. So this middleware server, which will having the services like caching of the data, the connection, query results, load balancing, and logging, auditing also. So for example, for the above, it will include the JDBC driver features in WebLogic, and that can be used. This type 3 can be used in internet since there is no client side software will be get needed. So it is not required to install the client side software for this type. At client side, single driver can be handled any database. So this is also very important advantage, that at a client side, a single driver can handle all the different databases, that it works with the providing the middlewares which will support the database. But there are some disadvantages. So what are those? That is, it requires the database specific coding to be done in the middle tier, and an extra layer will be added. It may result with the time bottleneck, some sort of a time it will be get consuming, and typically this will be overcoming by providing efficient middleware services described above. So these are the some advantages and disadvantages of this all Java driver, that is Java to network protocol. The next and the last type is a Java to database protocol. This is very important and good protocol. The JDBC driver, this is the fourth driver, that is type 4, is a pure Java drivers which will implement a proprietary database protocol like Oracle's SQL StarNet to communicate directly with the database. Like type 3 drivers, they do not require native database libraries and can be deployed over the internet without client installation. One drawback to type 4 driver is that they are database specific. So unlike the type 3 drivers, if you backend database changes, you may save to purchase and deploy a new type 4 driver. Some type 4 drivers are available of free of charge from the database manufacturers. However, because type drivers communicate directly with the database engine rather than through the middleware or a native library, that are usually fastest JDBC drivers are available. So this driver directly converts the Java statements to SQL statements. This is the most important advantages of type 4, that is Java to database protocol, that it will directly convert these Java statements to SQL statement. So the figure shows that there is a local machine, and the local machine contains the Java application that is at the client side, and type 4, that is 100% pure Java protocol, that is JDBC driver, has been used with the local DBMS, and it will be get connected with the database server. What are the functions of this type 4? That the function shows that type 4 is entirely written in Java, and that will communicate directly with the vendor's database through the socket connections, and no translation or middleware layer are required, improving performance of this Java to the database protocol. The driver converts JDBC calls into the vendor specific database protocol, and so that client application can communicate directly with the database server. So this is also a good function. The driver converts JDBC calls into the vendor specific database protocol, and so that the client application that will be directly communicate with the database server. So no need to communicate with the clients, that is local machine, and then local machine will be get request to the server. Like this, the client application will be directly communicate with the database server. So now it will completely implemented in Java and to achieve the platform independence. For example, include the widely used Oracle Thin driver, Oracle.JDBC driver, and the Oracle driver which will connect the JDBC Oracle Thin URL format. So these are the functions. So client machine will be get connected with the native protocol JDBC driver, and JDBC driver will be get connected with the database server. So what are the advantages? There, these drivers do not translate the request into DB request to ODBC or pass it to client API to the DB, and not they need to middleware layer for request indirection. So thus performance is considerably improved because there is a no need of ODBC translation, also no need to client API for the database, as well as no need of middleware layer for the request indirection. But there are some disadvantages. For example, a client side, a separate driver is needed for each database. Now, if we are using the different database, for each database, we require the separate driver at the client side. So these are the some advantages and disadvantages of type 4, that is Java to database protocol. Thank you. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay home. Thank you.